Jesus Christ is the most influential person who has ever lived. That more songs have been sung about him, more books written about him, more artwork of him, more movies about his life than any other figure in all of human history. No single person has ever had a bigger influence on psychology, on sociology, on history, on philosophy, on anthropology, on really anything. There's almost no one who is more well known, no one who's more widely worshipped. British author H.G. Wells once said, "I am not a believer, but I must confess that this penniless preacher from Nazareth is irrevocably the very center of history. Jesus Christ is easily the most dominant figure of all time." Just about any way you slice it, Jesus is the most influential person who's ever lived. Which begs the question, who is he? I mean, really, who is this guy who's made such a big impact? Well, there's so many different opinions on it. Martin Luther King, he once said Jesus Christ was an extremist for love and truth and goodness. Or someone like Richard Dawkins, who has said Jesus was a great moral teacher, but somebody as intelligent as Jesus would have been an atheist if he knew what we know today. There's just no shortage of opinions. You could ask anyone, they'll probably tell you exactly what they think, and all of them will present a slightly different picture of who Jesus is. So the question remains, who is he really? Now, you may or may not think you've got a decent idea yourself. I'm not sure why you're here. Maybe you're here to check your answers on that question. Maybe you think you know and you want to challenge some stuff, or maybe you just have totally no idea at all. I don't know what you think, but my hope during this course is that we get a chance together to chat about this, to understand from one another what we think, and then to give Jesus the right of reply to that question. To understand from him what he came to do, what he taught while he was here, and what he claimed about himself. During this course, we're going to zoom in on the biography of Jesus' life called Luke. There's 4 of these biographies in the Bible. They're called the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We're going to start with Luke and run with it for the rest of this course. And Luke's biography of Jesus begins this way. Many have attempted to put together an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as these things were passed on to us by those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and servants of the message. For this reason, it seemed good to me as well, having investigated everything thoroughly from the start, to write something orderly for you, most honorable Theophilus. My aim is that you may know the certainty of the message you were taught. See, Luke did the research. He talked to the eyewitnesses, and he wrote an account for his friend Theophilus. Essentially, Luke's the first guy in history to write his very own Introducing Jesus style book. And that makes it a great place for us to start. And so as we go through the course, let me encourage you, dig into Luke's gospel. This biography of Jesus' life, make the most of it. Read it for yourself even. But what we want to do together right now is just dive in and start to notice a few of the larger themes that emerge from this letter. Tonight we're going to look at 3 big ideas. And the first one is this: Jesus was a man. In a nutshell, the Bible and history reveal to us that Jesus was a real man. He was born into history some 2,000 years ago to a teenage virgin mother in a backwater town in someone else's backyard. And he spent the majority of his life working a pretty normal job, probably as a carpenter, before beginning a public ministry of teaching and healing. From the Gospels, we learn Jesus was pretty human-y, very human. He had a normal body of flesh and bones. He got hungry and thirsty. He got tired and he slept. He went to parties. He had friends that he loved. He had compassion on people. He wept. He was tempted. He was abandoned. He was betrayed. He even bled and died. The first thing we learn about Jesus is he was a man, a down-to-earth kind of guy. He's not some ephemeral spirit like the Force in Star Wars, or some sort of crazy myth like Santa Claus or Justin Bieber. Jesus lived a real life in the real world in real time. He was in every sense a down-to-earth kind of guy, and that may not seem very spectacular to you. And it's not controversial. Historians of all fields tend to agree that Jesus was a man in history. He really lived. But the fact that Jesus existed as a human in history is not what puts him at the center of history. Now, that would be the second and the third big claim we're going to look at tonight. The second big claim for tonight is that Jesus claimed to be more than a man. Now, I've been told that I have the perfect physique for mini golf. But if I made some sort of outlandish claim to you, like I'm the world's fastest swimmer too, you'd probably be suspicious, right? You'd start to think, like, I don't know, I'm no expert, but I tend to think short, stubby legs and a not very long upper body don't tend to translate that well to aquatic speed. Fun fact, that's why mermaids make such terrible mini golfers. The point is, when I make a claim like that, you're suspicious, and you would ask what everyone would ask. Where's the evidence? What is it that backs this up? Is there anything that points in this direction? Well, I want to suggest we go to a chapter in Luke, like chapter 8, and we get some pretty big clues. We get 3 successive stories in chapter 8. Now, first of all, Jesus is on this boat when it's hit by a storm, and then he stands up and he rebukes the storm. He doesn't just ask nicely for this storm to maybe die down a little bit. He asserts his authority over nature. He tells the wind and the waves to be still, and they are. And the people in the boat, they look at each other and start to ask, who is this? Who is this that even the wind and the waves obey him? Then the next story, he gets out of the boat and he's met by this man who's possessed by a number of evil spirits. And he commands them to leave the man. And the demons beg Jesus for mercy. They know they're not mucking around with someone who's like a substitute teacher you can just mess around with. No, they know this guy means business. They've been tormenting this poor man for ages. But as soon as Jesus arrives on the scene, they beg for mercy and they flee. And we start to see that Jesus' relationship to evil is different to most normal people too. And then in the very next passage, he heals a woman who's been sick for years, and he brings a young girl back from the dead. And then we start to see sickness and death, maybe they're things that Jesus has more authority over as well. Throughout the gospel, interest grows in who Jesus is and what he's come to do. People begin to gather to watch him teach and watch him work. And with everything he says and everything he does, the evidence begins to mount. This is no ordinary man. This is more than a man. But Jesus would go one step further than that. The third point for tonight is that Jesus claimed to be God. In Luke chapter 5, Jesus is teaching and preaching in this first century style house, which means it's kind of a dirt floor, probably one room in this house, and a thatched roof made of straw and things like that. And he's trending in the ancient Near East at this point. His popularity is on the rise. People are flocking to hear this guy speak. And so the house is packed. And at this time, Jesus is starting to get a bit of a rep as a healer. So people are bringing their sick, hoping that Jesus might be able to do something. And a few guys bring their buddy who's paralyzed. They put him on a stretcher, they carry him to the house. And you just imagine their hearts sinking when they see the people streaming out of this house. There's just no way in. But they weren't put off. They decided to climb on the roof and dig a hole in it. And then, kind of Mission Impossible style, they lower their friend down into the middle of the room. Just imagine you're in the crowd in the room at that moment. Here is this famous miracle worker. Here is a miracle waiting to happen, lying right in front of him. You take a deep breath. You lean in to see what happens next. And Jesus says, son, your sins are forgiven. And now it's awkward. I mean, they've thrown Jesus an absolute softball, and he takes a swing and a miss. This is the perfect opportunity for a miracle. And now Jesus is talking about this guy's sins. What is this? Has he just missed the point, showing a dangerously low amount of self-awareness? Or is it something else? What is it that would drive Jesus here in this moment to say, son, your sins are forgiven? Well, if you're going to understand Jesus properly, sin is a really important concept to get your head around. It's the word that the Bible uses for anything in us or anything done by us that's opposed to God. See, the Bible presents God as the creator of everything. And as the author, he's also the authority. As the one who made it, he just knows how it works best. So, like any loving parent would do, God gives us instructions, guidance for how to use the world that he's made, how we might flourish in the life that he's created for us. And we, his creation, we turn our backs on him. We turn away. We reject his design. We begin breaking his rules, and we start to make our own. So, for example, God's purpose for speech is that it's truthful, because the world just works better that way. And then when we lie on our taxes, that can rightly be called sin. Likewise, God's purpose for relationships is that they're loving. So when you murder a guy, that can rightly be called sin, because that's not very loving. And while these sin issues might be issues against a person or against the tax office, more fundamentally, they're issues against God. They're actions against God, because he's the creator. And we're his creation, and that's us turning our back on him, rejecting his plans and purposes, and trying to do his job for him. Often we think of sin as breaking rules, but just as often it's making up our own. The point is, we deny God's godness. We substitute him out and put ourselves on the throne. Sin is rejecting and replacing God. And if God is ultimately the one being sinned against, then it makes sense. God is the only one who can forgive sins, right? If true forgiveness is going to take place, God has to be the one to do it. And that's really important, because there's religious leaders in the room when Jesus says this statement. And they get cranky. They start thinking to themselves, when Jesus says, son, your sins are forgiven, they think, hold on, you can't say that. There's only one person who can say that. We don't think it's you, and we've got a word for this. It's blasphemy. They knew that sin was between a man and God, and they knew that no one could forgive sins but God alone. And yet here is Jesus saying to this man, son, your sins are forgiven. Jesus reads the thoughts of these religious leaders, and he responds, why do you think this way in your hearts? Which is easier, to say your sins are forgiven, or to say, get up and walk? But so you may know that the Son of Man has authority in the land to forgive sins. Jesus turns to the paralyzed man and says, get up, pick up your stretcher, and go home. Notice what Jesus has just done. He's showing these Jewish religious leaders who knew that only God can forgive sin, that he can forgive sin. Not only can he perceive the unspoken thoughts of these religious leaders, not only can he heal human bodies, he can heal the hurts a person has done against God. Forgive the sins that they've committed. He's claiming to have that kind of authority, and then he backs it up. He walks the walk, if you will, by healing this man's legs. Not only does he show his authority over wind and waves, or evil spirits, he shows it over sin itself. Jesus was a real man, but he claimed with his words and he demonstrated with his actions. He was much more than that. He was God. So what does that mean for us? There's still lots of opinions about Jesus. What do we do with that? Well, as we read through Luke together during this course, we'll see even more opinions about Jesus. We'll watch the people around him respond to his claims in a bunch of different ways. For some, the religious leaders who we'll meet next week, they're just angry. It was hatred and rejection. For others, like the disciples, they were amazed. Still others were just terrified, and they asked Jesus to leave them alone. Well, hopefully, over the next few weeks, we'll hear from each other too, and get a bunch more opinions on who Jesus is. And there's a whole range of possibilities, and I can't tell you what to think. That's totally up to you. But if I can, I'd like to rule out one possibility from the very beginning. Indifference. See, as I've done this course over the years, I've listened to dozens, maybe hundreds of stories, hundreds of different opinions about who Jesus is. And there's one option that keeps coming up again and again, that Jesus was just a good guy. He was just an agreeable dude, maybe a great moral teacher. People kind of want to treat Jesus like Australians treat the Queen, yeah? He's a pretty nice person. I'll admit he's got a fantastic resume, but really he can't help me with my problems. He's not that relevant to my life, and so it doesn't really matter what I think of him. Well, C.S. Lewis, the guy who authored the Narnia series, wants to push back on this idea. He once responded to this suggestion that Jesus was just a nice guy. And he wrote this: "A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level with the man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman, or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us, and he did not intend to." See, I hope you see that whatever you think of Jesus, you can't just write him off as a nice guy, as a good moral teacher. You can't say he's just quirky and generally positive, gifted at public speaking, a good strategist, because Jesus doesn't let you get away with that. The stuff he claims about himself is way, way bigger, which means either he was a liar or a lunatic, or he really was the Lord. So it's a really good thing you're here at Introducing Jesus, so you can work out which one is it. Which one do you think it is? What's your opinion? Because either this is much more than just a man, or he's the most dangerous man who's ever lived. But you got to choose. So I hope this is a helpful and enjoyable few weeks for you as we dig into this together. But I also hope you know we are not mucking around here. This stuff really matters, maybe more than anything else in the universe. So I hope it's a great time, a helpful time, a significant time for you as we dig into this together.